Shavua Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Shabbat. We're up to Perek Chet Mishnah Bet. Today's Mishnah should be Le'ilun Nishmat, Neria ben Tzvedlana, Aranbayev, Neriyahu ben Burchai, Israelov, Menuchatam Began Eden, Amen. Today's Mishnah is going to list minimum quantities that are considered significant in regards to Melachav transferring. Hamotzi Heaven Kedei La'asot Ozen Lekupa. One who takes rope outside is liable if it is long enough to make into a handle for a basket. Gemi Kedei La'asot Telai Lenafav Lichvara. Reed grass enough to make a hanging loop on a sifter or sieve, which the Mefarshim explain. The reed grass must be long enough to form a loop that can be attached to a sifter or sieve and used to hang the utensil on a hook. This length, the Rav says, is shorter than the minimum for rope. One who carries rope that suffices only to make such a loop is not liable because rope is not used for that purpose. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kidei litol mimenu midat min'al lekatan. The minimum for either of these items, rope and reed grass, is enough to measure the size of a child's shoe, which Mefarshim explained people would use a short length of rope or reed grass to measure a child's foot in order to show a shoemaker the proper size needed. Now this measure is smaller than the previous ones. Niyar kidei lichtov alav kesher muchsin. One who takes paper, which the Rav says refers to paper that was made from grasses. One who takes such paper outside is liable if it is large enough to write a toll collector's sign on it, which the Rav explains. When one paid a toll to cross a river, the toll collector would give him a receipt, a piece of paper on which two large letters were written that he could present to the toll collector on the other side of the river to show that he had paid. Now this is the smallest quantity of paper that has a significant use. V'amotzi kesher muchsin chayav, and one who takes out a toll collector's sign, which is a receipt on which the sign is written, is liable, which Mefarshim explains. Since a person is liable for carrying a blank piece of paper large enough for a receipt, it should go without saying that it is liable for carrying an actual receipt. So the Mishnah adds this point to teach that even if the receipt is not made of paper but of parchment, for which you need a larger minimum, which a larger minimum is usually required, one who carries it is still liable. Niyar machu kidei lechoch al pi tzlochit ktana shel palyaton. One who carries paper on which writing has been erased that is no longer fit for writing is liable if it is large enough to wrap over the opening of a small bottle of myrrh, perfume, to seal it. Now, once the paper that was used in those times had been written upon and the writing erased, one could no longer write on it. Therefore, it must be of a larger size, enough to seal a small bottle to have significance. And that is the Rabotai of Mishnah Bet. Mishnah Gimel continues, O Kedei La'asot Kamiya. One who takes partially tanned hide outside is liable if it's large enough to make a pouch for an amulet. Now the Mefarshim explain animal hide is made into parchment through the process of tanning. The Mishnah refers to hide that went through only part of the process and it's not smooth enough to write on. You need it to be large enough, it has to be large enough to make a pouch for an amulet to be liable. Now the amulet discussed here is either a piece of parchment with verses and holy names written on it, or a bundle of herbs. It's hung from the neck in a pouch to prevent or heal illnesses, like we brought down in chapter 6, Mishnah 2. Kelaf kedei lichtov ala parsha ktana shebatfilin shishma Yisrael. Parchment enough to write on it the shortest passage in Tefillin, which is the passage that begins Shema Yisrael. Now we know Tefillin contains 4 passages: Sefer Shemot, chapter 13, psukim 1 through 10, and chapter 13, psukim 11 through 16. Sefer Dvarim, chapter 6, psukim 4 to 9, and chapter 11, psukim 13 through 21. The shortest passage is Sefer Dvarim, chapter 6, psukim 4 to 9, which begins Shema Yisrael. Now, since parchment is expensive, it's not used for ordinary writing, but only for sacred texts, such as Torah scrolls, Tefillin, and Mezuzot. Therefore, unlike the paper mentioned in the previous Mishnah, which is significant, even if it's only the size of a tax receipt, parchment is not considered significant unless it's large enough for the shortest of the sacred texts, which is the Shema Yisrael passage in Tefillin. Now, in the tefillin worn on the hand, the 4 passages are written on a single piece of parchment. Therefore, the Mishnah must be referring to the tefillin worn on the head, in which each passage is written on a separate piece. Ink enough to write 2 letters. Now, although when a person writes, he usually writes more than 2 letters, this amount of ink is significant because it was common to write 2 letters on adjoining boards or of a structure or adjoining sections of a utensil in order to match them together when reassembling it. Now, since ink must be carried in a container, one might argue that even if a person carries an insignificant amount of ink, he should be liable on account of the container. But in the Mishnah's case, however, he is not liable for carrying the container because he's using it only as a means of transporting the ink, and it's therefore secondary to the ink, as Rashi says in Masechet Shabbat, page 80a. Kechol kedei lechol ayin echat. Chol, which is eye makeup, enough to paint one eye, which the Rav explains. One eye's worth of makeup is considered significant because some women would wear a veil that covered all but one eye, and they would paint only that eye. And that is an Abu Taib today's Mishna Yomi. Everybody should have a Shavua Tov. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.